Welcome to the Evolved Caveman Podcast. I am Dr. John, the guide for your heroic journey towards greater health, success, and most importantly, happiness. And now, on with the show. Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back after a brief summer hiatus, and I gotta say I am thrilled today to have with me Dr. James Bramson. And Dr. James is a licensed psychologist and social worker with over 25 years of experience. He's the director of the Mindful Alliance Center and co-founder of the East Bay Mindfulness Center. He works as a clinical director, supervisor, organizational consultant, neuropsychologist, forensic psychologist, expert witness, and clinician. Holy crap. He utilizes a strategic solution-focused CBT and IFS approach to help individual clients and couples optimize their full potential to live, work, and love mindfully. And when Jim is not running his clinic and professional network or seeing clients, he is doing expert witness work in court or overseeing organizational consulting projects, training shrinks in other countries, or just laying about. But mostly his joy comes from being a husband and raising his two kids, watching him playing sports and playing the drums and singing a little bit. And I have to say that having worked with Jim professionally, I want y'all to know that I am deeply in awe of his knowledge base, his caring, and perhaps most importantly, his integrity. He's one of those men you want your sons to grow up to be like. Wow. And the reason for this show today is that Jim's currently working on a book, and I think he's working on the second set of revisions, which will be the topic of today's show, which is Finding Joy During the Plague and Other Not So Good Times, which is the working title. And you can find out more about Jim at theebmc.com. wcminstitute.net and drbramson.com. And those links will be in the show notes. Jim, welcome. Thank you so much for coming aboard. How you doing?
Good. Can I just retire now and not do anything? I love the
it sounds like you've earned it.
The intro is so great. I could just, rest now and stop. But John, first of all, thank you for letting me be on your podcast. And I'm really big fan of you and your work. And I've been blowing you up lately, telling everybody about the podcast and about the amazing skill set you have, just the person you are. And, I know we talked about men having a hard time with compliments, but you're just going to have to deal with it. And
thank you.
So thanks.
Well, now that the Mutual Admiration Society is coming to a close, yeah. It's really nice though, because I do have a lot of love, a lot of admiration for you and the work you're doing and the way in which you do it. And I don't say that lightly or often to people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're not saying that to everybody. I would feel like a cheap date. I wouldn't want that. But, I think it's kind of like we're like in Vietnam together. You know what I mean? We're soldiers dealing with some heavy stuff. And when you have a chance to talk about the fight you're in, the war you're in, you become very close to the people who are in your bunker, and so we've had a chance to really get real with each other and authentic about our passion for the work we do, our craft, but also, it takes a lot of support. We have to support each other as men, as colleagues, and so I really appreciate. Did you say our crap or our craft? They sound very similar. Did I say crap? Oh my gosh.
No, it's my hearing. I'm getting at that age.
Maybe for me it's crap sometimes. It's not always perfect, John. Sometimes when I think this craft might be somebody else's crap, but Well,
I definitely feel like we've been in a foxhole together recently. So I appreciate taking the bullets together with you. And having you to have my back as well. So let's get into the topic.
Yes, sure.
Because I'm fascinated with this one because it does smack of positive psychology, but
it does.
We've been dealing with COVID for 2.5, 3 years now. Right. We know that depression and anxiety is rampant across the US. I think it's gone from like 11% of the population at any given moment to about 40% at any given moment. And so a lot of people are struggling out there. A lot of people are finding difficulty in finding joy, finding happiness, finding contentment, finding even ways to relax, I would say. So let's get a little bit into your area of expertise with this book.
Yes. So there's a lot of things that inform me in this topic. I've always been interested in Viktor Frankl. Let's start there. Viktor Frankl is a huge influence for me. And He, when he was at Harvard, he did something called the Purpose in Life Inventory, which really resonated with me. And then I started digging into his life, his work, and his struggle, trying to deal with the Holocaust, which one could say that's a plague of sorts, right? And other people who had to really tap into their inner strength and resiliency to overcome odds. And imagine being in the Holocaust, being in the camps, which would be worse than, having to be forced to wear a mask in a supermarket, I think.
Yeah.
But some people might treat that as a Holocaust of sorts politically. But getting back to that idea, though, what does it mean, to be facing your own demise? And how do you deal with that moment of truth where things seem dark and there's no exit out, there's no way out, it seems? How do you find your inner strength, resiliency, and for God's sake, how do you find joy, right, in those really dark moments? And it's an extreme example, but if you look at extreme examples, we can learn about how to deal with less extreme examples too. So what I understood about Viktor Frankl was that he developed logotherapy, and he looked at this idea of having a sense of purpose and meaning can keep us alive and functional in the worst moments. So in the Holocaust, the people who were of service to other people lived longer. They were able to overcome the threat. Their immunity system was stronger. They were more resilient. And so in those moments, he tried to find a sense of meaning and purpose while in the camps, trying to help other people out who are struggling worse than he was. And that gave him life. And then when he left, the camps and he went to Harvard and he developed logotherapy, he realized that dealing with things like death and dealing with things like purpose are really, really critical. And so when we deal with plagues, this idea of threats, things that really upend our central nervous system, when our sympathetic nervous system is being rocked by things we can't control or change. How do we hold that information? How do we hold that threat? What do we do? What are our choice points? And so then I started thinking more deeply about it. So he said that, we have to face, acceptance commitment therapy involves unmasking things and looking at accepting what is and not battling against it. So if we can accept what is and really disentangle it and look at it, it becomes less threatening. If we can look at our sense of meaning and purpose, even when we're faced with hardship, that can help our resiliency. And if we can hold positive psychology, the classic example, Seligman, of course, was the one who founded that. But one of the classic experiments that I always stood out for me, like in Psychology 101, was this idea of the classic rat maze experiment where the rats can't get out. And there's this learned helplessness experience because they either get shocked or tormented while they try to escape. And then once the shocks go away and there's a free way to escape, they still don't leave because they don't realize they can leave. They don't realize they have freedom now because they've been conditioned to be negative. They've been conditioned to only see the darkness, to only see the limits. They don't see the light. They don't see the joy. They don't see the possibility.
Can I pause you there for a second? Because so I spoke with Dan Tomasulo, who wrote Learned Hopefulness.
Yeah.
And he's done work with Seligman. And what they found, they actually revised that learned helplessness piece because they found that learned helplessness isn't actually learned. What they believe now is that helplessness is actually our default state.
Yeah.
And that makes sense if you think of us as infants, that we're helpless in that state, that we have to actually learn to be autonomous.
Yeah. 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 And I think that that makes a lot of sense to me, John, Dr. John, that you'd want to be able to be autonomous. And, and I think we may forget that. We may not realize that unless we're taught it or we learn it or we see the possibilities in front of us. And that's where a therapist can come in, or hopefully the book might come in. And right now, there's this guy named Glasser who did something about choice theory, based on Adler's work, and he revised that, looked at choice theory. And so if you look at choices, like we can choose to learn to be autonomous. We can choose to focus on joy and light. We can choose to focus on limits and cognitive distortions and, our own stuckness, and not see creative possibilities. And so so in the current times we're in, what's extraordinary is that we've been hit with this idea of, like they had the Spanish flu, right? Back in the Spanish flu, was spreading, the population died, or bubonic plague, before that, or the dark ages. We go to any time in history and look at what was going on for people. And there's a lot of hysteria. There's a lot of fear. And a lot of people, some people believe in science. Some people dismissed it. Some people were curious. Some people were incurious. So in the book, I emphasize the importance of some of these things I'm mentioning, which is curiosity.
Mm-hmm. That's huge.
Which is really key, right? If you want to be joyful or contented, you have to be curious about how do you do it under difficult circumstances. How do you have to want to learn how to do that. It's not something that is a setting that you can just put in. You got to work toward.
Well, and even prior to that, I would say you can use curiosity to reduce anxiety or to allow anxiety to move. I like that metaphor. I think this is from Todd Kashdan's book, Curious, where he's got, you've got the anxiety knob on the stereo, and you've also got this curiosity knob. And we're usually focused on that anxiety knob, which often gets locked at a 10 out of 10. And, we don't realize that we can choose to move that curiosity dial, which then allows the anxiety dial to move on its own and is more likely to get stuck or more likely to get unstuck more quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
By just making the decision to be a more curious person.
Yeah, and you're emblematic of several things there. One is that there's a choice in that process.
Mm-hmm.
One, there's a choice, which knob do you want to turn? There's a choice.
Or do you want to be a knob?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Or do you want somebody to turn your knobs around? But I think that's true. And exactly. And so this idea of there's been great things that have happened. Like when I look at my clients, those who had a positive experience during COVID, or had a positive experience during our last president's administration, or have had a positive experience, dealing with, a divided country that's been almost on the brink of a civil war. The clients who are who rise above all that, what are they doing? How are they holding all these experiences? What can I possibly offer them? Yeah, I was curious about that myself. And because some people have had a really great experience during COVID and during this plague, during this last 2-3 years. And let me ask you, John, if you could think about what you think of, just, I'll try to hopefully elucidate some more, but if you could think about who do you think, what would be the difference between people who have had a positive, even joyful experience during this horrifically challenging time versus those who don't? How would you imagine, what are those differences for those?
I think part of it's curiosity. Part of it, I think what I've seen is people that are more introverted have done better in this environment. I think people that enjoy their family have done better in this environment. I think people that have learned to get back to nature and really show appreciation for nature have done well in this environment.
Yeah. Well, those are some of the key things you just said, that a lot of people realized that the pace of life was too fast.
Mm-hmm.
That
change in values. Yeah.
Yeah. And connecting to core values for most people, if you talk to somebody who's about to die, what matters to you right now? Well, it's going to be your family, your relationships, your legacy.
I wish I'd spend more time at work.
Yeah. I wish
that's what I'm going to say on my deathbed. Damn it, I should have worked more.
Right time, but it's right. It's not about that. And so those are the things. And so during this time, those people who leaned into their family, leaned into their core values, took better care of their health, learned how to meditate, took on less, decided to be in nature more, decided to pick up hobbies. Some people learn to play music again, to play chess. I'm speaking for myself a little bit here, but people like me, or different than me, picked up things, to really that they would have not have picked up, and I think some people, built a relationship stronger and had more time for self and more space. Some examples of that. I think it's pretty hard to
in there.
Yeah.
One of the things that it seems to me that we lose as adults, we lose our sense of playfulness, and we lose sight of the really simple joys and pleasures that we knew back when we were 5, 6, 7 years old, rolling down a grassy hill, or making a mud pie, or playing in the sandbox, or going for a walk, or riding a bike, or going on a slip and slide. Like, there's a lot of going for a hike in nature. A lot of these things I think we had back when we were younger. And then somewhere along the line, we get caught up in the idea of these adult pleasures, smoking, drinking, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all that stuff. And I love all those last three, but
I had fun with all those.
But those are hedonistic pleasures, and they only last as long as the pleasure itself lasts.
Yeah. I think that, I realize that's fleeting. You're onto a critical piece. I call it being, I'm not into drugs or whatever, but, or I still like rock and roll, the other stuff you mentioned, but I'm not so into the drug part. But I think that what I realized is that that people get adulterated, and there's an innocence that people have when they're younger. And Adler talked about one of the 5 core areas for psychological health, one being fun. Fun. He was the first person to say fun, joy, basically. That's essential. And the other thing he said was Guy Maschasco for the idea of community. Community is really important. So having a sense of belonging, critical for joy and health. And then he talked about, and I know you and I have discussed this in other ways before, this idea of, what Rogers might call positive self-regard, but he looked at this idea of, having positive self-worth, essentially, is what he looked at, And, those were, among other things that he talked about. And freedom and autonomy has been mentioned, too, as another area, having freedom. And when you don't feel free, and you can't be playful, and you don't have good self-worth, and you don't have a purpose, and you don't have time, and you don't have tenderness, you're probably not going to have a huge joy quotient. Okay. And it's dynamic. It's not static. It requires constant attention and constant lever shifting, because the world is so dynamic and changing all the time, and we're changing all the time. So it involves mindfulness and being a witness to ourselves and our surroundings and what's going on, and becoming an active learner, an active agent for change in our lives. And so what I get really inspired by is, my whole life I've been inspired by this, and still am. What keeps me going here, John, is reaching one's potential. And so can we really work toward our potential when things around us are falling apart? When people are getting sick and ill, when people have to wear masks, when people are arguing over politics, when people are getting divided, when people are, when there's higher rates of mass shootings, when there's higher rates of, lack of stability, which is what's occurring around us, when democracy is falling apart, as a lot of us believe that. How can we, feel safe and on purpose during these times? And so in the book, what I get into are the how part, like what can you do? And I teach different modalities and models of some of the models of psychotherapy that I believe apply to these things about. So resiliency is a big piece, joy is a big piece. Self-leadership is a big piece. And I think that's self-compassion, huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is a really key part. I know that we talked before about, this idea of shame. It was interesting. My wife listened to the podcast we did, right? And she loved it. And it's gotten great because it was you, not me. I just sat back and let you be you, But people listen to the podcast and I got so much positive feedback on the podcast that you did. And my wife was pondering, and she's so smart, she's pondering the question we asked about shame. What role does it have? Does it have any good purpose? And she reflected and goes, I can think of one thing. I go, what is it? I couldn't come up with it. She goes, well, it kind of regulates some people from being bad actors. So people might police themselves more.
I think that was true more back when we were in tribes. That, we could rely on shame. And I think you could rely on guilt to do the same thing more effectively. Yeah. But maybe the really bad actors, but then there's some bad actors that don't feel any shame.
That's right. Yeah. And they're called sociopaths. But that's true. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there. But I think that what gives joy is so unique to each of us. And there's not a one recipe for joy. I like Thich Nhat Hanh really, to me, nailed it. We talked about the different elements of joy, and he talked about it in terms of love and in terms of the 4 elements of love. And he couldn't disconnect joy and love. And I think it's real hard and they're different ideas. Love is something we could probably spend 2 hours debating. What does love really mean? Is Leo Buscaglia the expert? Was it in Corinthians 1:13?
Well, I like, Barbara Fredrickson's definition of love, which is someone that makes you feel all the variety of positive emotions to some extent simultaneously.
Oh, that's great.
And I think there's more to it than that, but I think that's a pretty good start.
That's a great, I'm going to steal that and use it as mine. So who's the reference for that? That's
Barbara Fredrickson.
So,
she's amazing.
For other podcasts, people are writing down our book names and references, by the way. People are saying, I was writing down all these things, you guys were talking. I didn't know that one. But I like that. I also think it's an orgasmic experience too.
But I have a question for you about joy, in the sense of, I think of joy, if you think of a 1 to 10 scale in terms of like intensity of happiness, I see joy as a 9 or a 10 on that scale. And I see content at like a 6. Well, I guess if we're starting to get in the negative, below 5, negative emotions. But I think of contentment as a mild intensity happiness. I think of joy as a higher intensity happiness. Mm-hmm. And there's cultural differences, I believe, between what we look for here in the West and what our expectations are culturally for happiness versus that in the East, like in Japan. Yeah. Right. And I think, they're looking for a much more milder form of happiness, something like contentment. I think we are expecting and looking for something like joy, which to me is a little bit harder to sustain and a little bit harder to get to. It's going to be a more peak experience. Yeah.
So, okay. So this is an interesting thing. I mean, one could argue that, Woody Allen joke is you have to choose between misery and despair. I'll choose misery. Okay.
The difference being?
Well, there is a difference. One is more of a permanent condition. Maybe one is more temporal, And contentment, would probably be the choice of most people if you had to choose, because it's more of a steady state. And it's more of, there's more equilibrium in that. But then if you didn't have joy, you wouldn't have those peak experiences, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if you could vacillate in a non-manic way between,
that's the catch, non-manic.
Yeah, I don't want to, promote hypomania here as a solution to the plague. But if there's this space between contentment and joy, and you defaulted toward contentment, and you were able to have peak experiences around joy, and creating the conditions so that that's possible on a more consistent basis. One could argue you could deal with bad events, not so good times,
absolutely,
in a more effective way. And you'd be easier to deal with as a human being. And the people around you would find you easier to deal with. They'd want to be in your foxhole.
And I like that. I like the simple theory that, we've got 2 buckets of emotions in us. One is negative, one's positive. And, obviously no emotion is negative. So this is a little bit of a misnomer, but I think people intuitively understand what I'm saying when I say that. And I think we normally overfocus on that bucket of negative emotions, anger, fear, sadness, guilt, shame. Right. And we're not very good at recognizing that bucket of positive emotions. But if we can fill that up, my belief is that we have to empty it before we can start to fill up that bucket of negative emotions at times. But it also gives us enduring resources to help out other people, to your point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that, I think about a car analogy, for example, I have a hybrid car and I have an electric car right now because, I'm trying to be a good citizen, I guess, or whatever you want to say. But I actually, I like the idea of the electric car because, it's electric and I don't have to use gas and it saves me money. Right. But did I get range anxiety around that? Which is a problem. And then with a hybrid, I don't have to have range anxiety, but I'm not saving as much, money because it's, it's a hybrid, even though the first 50 miles are free because it's plug-in hybrid. Here's the point. I think that if you could look at this like that you need all the emotions in order to function. In a way, we have to be a hybrid system, ideally. And, we need all the what you might call negative feelings, but in the IFS model, we don't, which I find very helpful, and I know you're an expert on this and you consulted on.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm a fan.
No, but you are, but you're an expert on, you worked on the Inside Out, which dealt with emotions and a very deep, I thought that was brilliant, that movie. So deep psychologically, I loved it.
One of the things I'm thrilled about is it gives a whole generation of young people a vocabulary to understand what's going on internally, but also it normalizes what's going on internally for them.
In my book, Before I Knew You, John, I talked about, in one of my earlier drafts, and it's taken me a long time I'm done the second draft, and hopefully, there won't be a third, but I'll be done and get this thing out. But I think in one of the earlier iterations of it, I talked about Inside Out as a movie and compared and contrasted that with IFS and talked about how IFS and the movie are so simpatico. And this idea that there are, all feelings are welcome. We're not there to judge them. We're there to be informed by them. And I think if you want to deal with hard times, you want to deal with tragedies and disasters and plagues and not so good times, you have to know how to hold all feelings in a way that doesn't dysregulate you. Okay. And the way to do that is becoming more, what I believe, becoming a self-leader, or bodhisattva, Christ-like if you're a Christian, or, a good rabbi if you're a Jew, whatever, the idea of being enlightened being, okay? A wise person, wise heart, different names we give things. How can we tap into that self-leadership during these moments so that we're in charge of our own behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and reactions? And then our feelings, all of them, are welcome. And they don't have to be exiled. They don't have to be judged. They don't have to be attacked. We don't have to be fearful of them. But we have courage and curiosity about what they offer us. And during plagues and difficult times, it's really more important than ever to be able to handle all the repertoire of our emotions and be able to emerge, as better self-leaders. And that's the challenge I throw out to my readers who will read this book. How can you not only get to baseline during difficult times, but how can you go beyond that? And really, like Viktor Frankl did, how can you go beyond that and allow those difficult moments, experiences, and emotions to transform you as a human being and to come out of it more whole and holy?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's why I believe that good emotional management skills are really the key or the foundation to a happy life. Because when we say happy life, or you're going to be joyful, or you're going to be content more of the time, it's not that you're going to be content or happy or joyful all the time. You're going to have these other emotions that arise. And I think to learn that skill, and I love the line from mindfulness, I think it's John Kabat-Zinn, allow whatever's arising to arise without judgment.
Yes.
That without judgment piece takes years, but it's critical, because every man I've ever talked to, our first strategy with emotions is suppress and deny.
Exactly.
I can't feel depressed. I'm not a pussy. I can't feel. I can't feel a panic attack. I can't feel. Anxious. I can't. And
I would say, call me pussy galore if you want to call me that. That's a James Bond character. Yeah. Anyway, but can you be man enough, or person enough, human enough, to not be caught up in that ego stuff about that, and I think that's a big part of the work. It takes a lot of effort to, we talk about vulnerability. You and I have discussed that. I don't think you can be joyful if you don't tap into your own vulnerability, and you don't have some level of self-acceptance and self-love, and not narcissistic self-love, but healthy self-love, right? And healthy acceptance. So it doesn't mean you give yourself a pass at every stupid thing you do. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So to what extent do you see embarrassment getting in the way of this? And I'm thinking for men, but this fascinates me, because I think many of the men that I speak to are lousy at taking themselves lightly, at being quick and easy to laugh and smile. And I think, embarrassment is one of those things that just stacks up in the way. And we do so much to keep from being embarrassed.
All I know is that when I walk within 5 feet of two teenagers, that they feel embarrassed sometimes. And they used to like to hold my hand. They used, whatever, But I think it's interesting how early that starts to take hold. But I'm going to sit with that idea about embarrassment. Interesting thing. I don't know if you had this experience when I was a kid, and I still feel like one sometimes. I talked about. I still don't feel my age, while I look at. But what I do feel inside is young sometimes, and I sometimes I want to tap into the more vulnerable time where I remember when I felt embarrassed before when I was young. And what I noticed was that the kids who were popular, when I was in elementary school, were the ones who could laugh at themselves.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was so interesting. They totally were cool. People teasing them. Sometimes they would tease themselves. They were okay with anything that was embarrassing.
I just had this conversation with a client yesterday about, look at the class clowns. And I think there's a distinction between kind of cool, kind class clowns and then those that are a little bit more mean-spirited. But the ones that are more cool and kind, what is it about them that allows them to be funny? What is it about them that allows them to be popular or be liked by a lot of people? And I think a big part of it is they're comfortable being embarrassed. They're comfortable making fun of themselves, making a spectacle with themselves as the butt of the joke. Yeah. And people gravitate towards that.
Totally. Making, be able to make a mistake and make fun of yourself. Like Letterman, I loved Letterman, and I went to a show in New York, I remember I had this amazing weekend where I went to SNL and then I went to see Letterman and one weekend, both live,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I had a connection and we were going to that. But anyway, I wouldn't have gotten in otherwise. But I got in. You have to answer some trivia question about the Letterman show, by the way, to get in. They ask you some really obscure thing. You have to prove you actually watched the show. And I'm like, God, it's like, I haven't felt like this since my SATs, so.
This high stakes.
Yeah. I want to get into a good college, I want to get into Letterman, Thank God I got into good colleges. I got a Letterman, thank God, but my fear of embarrassment was there still. And, but I remember watching Letterman and I was amazed. He would make gaffes and mistakes. And that was like his best comedy. He was at his best when he would screw up and the show would get screwed up. And he was in the middle of performing on live television and things would go wrong. And he just took a bad moment and flipped it into this hilarious moment. And I don't think that was, and so, that's what I think is the ultimate thing is that it's about, when we break it down further, it's really about how much we care about what people think of us and how much that can control our sense of joy and contentment. Like my son, it blows my mind because he masters something it took me forever to master, which is he doesn't give a shit about what people think of him so much.
Oh, that's such a huge skill.
I go, how did you do that?
Teach me. I'm your student.
I mean, John, I still want you to like me. I got to be honest, I do. I think you do, but I do.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. But that's bullshit. Why should I care so much about that? Right. And so I just want to be me. If you like me as me, it's better. I don't want you to like me as me trying to please you though. Okay. And I want to be me liked. Right. And so what I think it comes down to is when we're embarrassed, it's usually because how are people going to see us, perceive us? What's our image? What's our ego? And ego is a death knell of joy and happiness. We're not going to, if we're so worried about managing our image and ego, we're not going to find contentment and joy. And we're not going to be resilient. We're not going to get through hard moments because we're so wrapped up in what people think about us and how they see us. And that's a purgatory, I think.
Yeah. What do you think about internal versus external validation as it relates to what others think about it? Because I think we get wrapped up in looking for external validation. And I kind of postulated that one of the jumps from, let's say, adolescence to manhood is transitioning from over-focusing on external validation to internal validation.
Yeah. Yes. That, so that idea of internal locus of control, external locus of control, validation from in or out. And I think, there's that great Daniel Siegel book, Parenting from the Inside Out. Mm. And I always liked him. In fact, I'm going to do a workshop in Portugal next hopefully next summer with a colleague of mine from Australia, who I've taught with many times. And we're going to do this. It ties in what we were talking about, but it ties into this idea of, parenting ourselves from the inside out, and then parenting children from the inside out. And if you look at it from both directions, this idea of, I think that's something we're doing for the rest of our lives, is how do we learn to nurture and parent ourselves so that we can validate ourselves. If you're a good parent, I think, and that's to me the most important thing you could ever do in my book. More important to me than anything I do is I want to be a good parent, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it's so vital to who I see myself as. And I'm still a work in progress.
I was going to say, I agree, and I still fall short.
Yeah, you know what I mean, John. It's the hardest thing. It's nothing can impact you more than how your kids are feeling and doing and functioning. The love, the sense of protection for them, and so I tell myself that I really want to. I want them. Speaking of my kids or anyone, myself, is to really to validate myself more than I need external validation. I spent most of my life wanting other people to please other people, to people like me, to want praise and recognition, so I could shore up who I thought I was.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you.
So much. It was like such a big deal, like what college I got into. It was such a big deal how I did on my test scores. It was such a big deal about, who I was dating. It was such a big deal that, how much money I might make. It was all these things are bullshit, and I put a lot of effort into caring about such.
But that's the story, the bullshit story that we're fed from a really young age.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that really matters. And, to me, a lot of this gets back to values too. And I think that, two of the biggest values in this younger generation right now, high school and early college, are wealth and fame.
Yeah.
I want to be a social media influencer.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that strikes me is that a far better path to happiness is self-transcendent goals.
Yeah.
So serving others, coaching youth athletics, supporting the political change, restoring the environment, something that's bigger than yourself is a far better way to go. Happiness in your front window, in your window.
I was thinking about, do you know Kohlberg's work on morality? I remember that.
Get out of here. That's who I studied in graduate school until my advisor who studied under Kohlberg said, that doesn't predict moral action at all. And I was like, oh, son of a bitch.
I liked it though, and
I love Kohlberg.
Yeah. And so this idea for those who are listening, is that there's this evolutionary scale. Like imagine if you're learning algebra 1 and then trig and then calculus, and then whatever, you have to learn the basics before you go on to the higher level math, right? One would think. And in terms of morality, it's not unlike that. Piaget talked about, as our brains develop, we go from concrete operational states to maybe more abstract reasoning states. Our morality should match that. So we should go from more primitive forms of morality to more complex, abstract forms of morality, to go from ourselves to our immediate community to larger world. And then, you might tie in Erickson's work and think about generativity versus stagnation, ego integrity versus despair. Those two layers there too. If you tie all these models together, I think what it means for me is this idea that nothing is not what you. If you interview people at the end of their lives, I'm fascinated by that. I love that. I'll try not to get into too many subjects here, but one of the things that really hit my heart big time was Fierce Grace by Ram Dass, a documentary about his life after he had a stroke.
Yeah, just saw that.
And there's a painting of him in my room right now here, from his house in Hawaii.
Wow.
That, I'm hugely into him, and I have a couple paintings from his house here, and they're very meaningful for me. One's psychedelic. It glows in the dark. It's really weird. If you creep my kids out, it actually glows in the dark. And they said, you got to get this out of the house. So I put in my little back office. You see Ram Dass glowing in this eerie way. like he's tripping on some kind of...
like a hallucinogen.
So they said, they won't let it in the house. So it's in my little man cave, where I'm talking to you right now. But he talked about, here's this powerful force, be here and now, revolutionized psychology, Harvard psychologist, great story, made a huge contribution. And to mindfulness too, and to yoga and other things. And then his message later in life was all about love. I saw his very last talk in Hawaii when he had another stroke. And the only thing he would do is this, he barely could speak, but he was so powerful. And he would point to his head. I'm pointing to my head right now. And he would then point to the heart, and he would go, basically heart-centered awareness, and it's all about love, and if you can validate yourself, you can learn how to unconditionally love yourself. And if you need other people to validate you, you can't unconditionally love yourself.
Right.
And if we can't learn to do that, how are we going to really validate and love others? When we don't feel validated, we work with a couple, and one person is so hungry for validation, you can be pretty much assured that they can't validate their partner. You can be pretty assured, for whatever reasons, they don't love themselves. They can't show up lovingly in the way their partner wants. And there's a hunger there that can't be fed, and they can't feed the hungers of their partner. And so I think that that's the kind of stuff that, I find fascinating.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was just talking to a client this week, and he said a line that stunned me. Like, I had to pause and roll back and think about it. He said, I wasn't able to say I love myself until I was 49. And like, he literally couldn't say, like, I love John in my head until he was almost half a century old.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually not a bad yardstick to just see, what does that feel like to say, I love myself or I love John? Is there, do you get this feeling of disgust or revulsion or aversion, or does it feel comfortable? Does it feel like a glove? Yeah.
Maybe not the O.J. Simpson glove, but a different kind of glove.
Well, that was really forced on, and that was left out in the rain apparently and shrunk. But I'm talking about a new glove.
All right. Anyway, but sorry, I had to throw that out. A little my improv comedy stuff. But I think I think it is. It needs to be like that. Has to feel like a natural fit, and I'm still working on it. Like, when I lost my motorcycle keys last week, I don't know what it is, but I'm usually good about not losing stuff. But then if I lose something, my wife has this great karma. Like, she'll lose things all the time, and they always show up, and she'll always find them. I lose something not as often, but it never comes back, and I never can find it again. And when I lose things, I really do it well. I mean, like, I really lose them forever.
You're an overachiever.
And I do think, heaven is this place where you get reacquainted with all your lost objects from life.
That'd be cool.
Wouldn't that be right? That's what, it's one of the parts of heaven that we might, if we believe in such things. But I went through this, my old self-blaming, self-shaming, self-loathing moment. Like, I can't believe I lost my only motorcycle keys. And now I'm going to have to take apart the ignition. There's no master key. It's going to cost me $800, to do this. I can't ride my bike there. I'm going to have to get it towed. And so I'm going on this long rant, I'm feeling sorry for myself, feeling like a victim, like this is a real first world problem,
Yep.
Right? But oh, poor me. I can't, find my keys. I'm such a, it's ridiculous. And then, I ranted at myself for, too long. And then I realized that, I started to do the work that I would want a client to do. And I started to do the inner work and go, who cares if you lost your keys? It's just a key, so you can't ride your motorcycle. So what, it's okay. You've had a lot going on, you've been very busy, and it's just a sign that you need to slow down and you need to really not be as busy, and you need to really be more grounded. So there's something off in the program, and you've got to really go back and rework the program. And this is just a symptom. And fortunately, my wife was great, and she helped me find the master key to the motorcycle, and she's amazing that way. But she complimented, she goes, you didn't freak out like you usually do when you lose something. You actually only freaked out for like a half an hour, and then you were okay. I said,
and that's progress.
That's progress, So, the point is that, and I can laugh about that now, and that's important because it's ridiculous to get that upset with yourself for making a mistake. It's ridiculous to invalidate yourself for something so stupid. But we invalidate ourselves with the most stupid things.
Can I ask you a personal question, and you feel free to pass on this?
Yeah.
But I've been wondering about like those automatic negative thoughts. And, as I talk about them with clients, I'm like, we all have these Hall of Fame kind of classic negative thoughts. And I think at first you got to pay a little bit of close attention to kind of catch them, because I think at first we're not even aware of them. But I think that there's themes of these thoughts that are universal for all of us. What are some of your, over the years, what are some of your Hall of Fame negative thoughts that you've noticed?
I think, probably all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, some of the classic CBT ones. We want to go specific. I think.
What about
I think
intelligence?
Which part of that?
Well, do you one of my classic ones is you're such a dumbass. And it's a little more colorful than that, but
about myself or others, or
about myself, and internally, like if I make a mistake, what I used to see is I would just shred myself with these insults.
Oh yeah, well, with the key thing, like I said, I can't believe I did that. I should know better. What the hell am I thinking? I can kind of get into just terrorizing myself, being even now, but the point is this, if we look at it like progress, not perfection, right? That if we can recognize so in the IFS model, what are those voices? Those are parts. And those parts are often exiles from earlier times in our life. They've been around a long time. What's their purpose? Well, one of the purpose is that, perfectionism is one of those things. I had a need to be perfect. Why did I need to be perfect? Because people expected a lot of me, and I expected more than they expected of me.
Well, and I didn't want to be embarrassed.
I didn't want to be embarrassed. I wanted to look.
That was mine.
Why people like me. I wanted to be, I didn't want people to withdraw from me because I wasn't perfect enough. I wanted to be celebrated. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be a part of. And so, it connects to deeper things, and then you start to look at that and hold that differently. Like, okay, what would you say to a kid, your own kid? Well, it's okay. So what? You lost a key. It's all right. It'll be okay. We'll we'll figure it out. And, you have a lot on your mind. You've been really busy. Hey, I love you. Don't worry about it. Don't stress over it. It's okay. Don't even think 2 minutes about it. And so we got to channel that part of ourselves that's nurturing.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead to joy and to contentment.
That feels a lot like an exercise from Kristen Neff, where she kind of walks you through, think of a behavior that you would like to change, and where you normally try and change it by yelling at yourself with your inner critic.
Yeah, right.
And she walks you through the path of the inner critic. And then basically you get to the end and it's like, what's your inner critic trying to get you to do? Let's say you're trying to lose 5 pounds. Yeah. Well, the inner critic's trying to help you to lose that 5 pounds. It's just doing it in a way that is often abusive, self-abusive.
Yes.
And then if you take the self-compassionate voice, which, often we have to practice to even hear that one, but the self-compassionate voice is trying to get you to the exact same goal, to lose 5 pounds. It's just doing it in a much kinder, more nurturing way. So they're both trying to get you to the same point. It's just 2 different pathways.
Well, that's a great way of explaining it, John. I think that there's many roads to Rome, and one road goes through Vietnam, and the other road goes through I'd rather
goes through the Vietnam War.
Why not go through, Maui and Kauai and, Lanai or whatever, So I would rather go that route. But we don't think about that choice, and I think that self-compassion and kindness, one of the things I also got really turned on to, that there's this great, I don't know if you've seen this British monk who talks about, he talks about kindfulness.
Oh, cool.
And it's this great YouTube clip. You can click it on. And he's hilarious. And I think I saw him at Spirit Rock one time. Yeah, a long time ago. Anyway, so he goes into this. He thinks it's like the most important thing, that it's hard to separate things because there's so much connectivity in all the things we're talking about. But how can we validate ourselves? How can we love ourselves? How can we take the path that you described versus the arduous path if we're not kind to ourselves? And if there's this inner critic or this self-abuser, this self-critic who has been really hard on ourselves and is familiar to us, is automatic, just kicks in automatically. Ultimately we have to learn how to find kindfulness, somewhere there to disconnect from that critic, that abuser, that whatever form you want to say it takes. And because what I hate, it's painful. I know when you sit with a client and they're being self-abusive and how they refer to themselves. Yeah. There's so many examples of that. Like, I remember once I did a talk in high school kids. I just volunteered to do it. And I was just nerding out, reading like 6 or 7 books about body dysmorphia. And I thought, this might help some kids in high school. These talks were sold out. I couldn't believe. I know you worked in the schools for a while. People were lining up. And this is probably because it's free. I don't know. but it was probably the topic. It's about body shaming and how much self-hatred both boys and girls have about their bodies in high school. And
it's both sexes. Yeah. I think for a while when I was young, I used to assume it was mostly female. And then I was like, oh, no. And I think it's because of that, negativity bias where we over-focus on the 5% of our bodies that we hate the most or that we're most embarrassed by.
Exactly. You hear supermodels who hate the way they look, or bodybuilders who can never get big enough for taking enough steroids.
Well, I remember there was a study done with professional soccer players in England. And they found that something crazy, like 80% of them were dissatisfied with how their body looked because they thought they should be more muscular.
Yeah.
And yet they were elite athletes.
Yes. And that's what this is the funhouse mirror in which we see ourselves,
Yeah.
If we can't validate ourselves, we can't love ourselves. We're not kind, we're not going to, and we can't, during normal times, we can't do this. How are we going to do it during harder times like plagues, stressful events? And the other point of the book, by the way, just to say this, is that I don't think this is it for plagues, by the way, not that I'm a Nostradamus here, but we've had them forever, and they're not going away. And we're going to have other not so good times. I mean, could you have predicted all the crazy crap that's happened the last 3 years? I mean, come on, it's crazy what's happened the last 3 years, the January 6th stuff, rioting, I mean, who would have imagined it, right? So, people hate the FBI, people hate cops, people want to, the number of mass shootings we've had, you can't even keep track of them,
No.
People, so it's, you could lose yourself trying to, in the news, and doom scrolling all these things, right? And so what really, so these things aren't going away. We're going to, unless, major things happen with policy and we've had enough. We're a country that is what we are. We're going to have shootings. We're going to want freedom to have our guns. We're going to want to have, we're going to have divisiveness. This isn't going away. Okay. I wish it would. I like it to go away. I hope it goes away. And I hope we heal. I hope we become united. I love that. I hope we treat each other as united versus the other.
Yeah.
And we see our humanity in each other. And we don't try to win, in the ways that cause other people we have to win at the expense of other people. And I hope this shifts. I hope we have this, like Kohlberg, a higher level of morality, consciousness. And it's interesting right now, people want more civility. Most people want more kindness. Most people want to stop the bickering. They're sick of it. They want to have the contentment. They've had enough. And I think that there's an inflection point for our country where people want peace. They want equanimity. They want They want something else. They want something bigger than this. They realize how small-minded this stuff is. And so I'm hoping, in some small way, that I catalyze a little bit of that shift now for people on some level, so that we can, be more, find our morality and our humanity toward each other. And
and I think that's a great goal, to find ways that we're similar, to tap into curiosity and see if we can have conversations with people that we don't agree with, and be curious about what are their values and how do their values speak to what they believe, rather than just label them as other asshole, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is, liberal, conservative, MAGA.
You're stupid if you don't see things the way I see.
Yeah, we got to get past the labels and be a little bit more curious about the humanity of people in general. So that's a good note to bring it to a close on. Let me ask you, just in closing, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
No, you asked me plenty, John. No, you're great. I can't think of anything I would have asked me that you didn't ask me, but I really I mean that, but I want to thank you so much for giving me a little platform here to bend the ear of the listeners. And thanks for your smart questions. And keep doing what you're doing. You're doing really important work here. You found a niche here that is so vital, not just for men, but for everyone. But I really hope, I've turned people on your podcast because I think it's been so valuable, and you're doing really important work out there. So keep going, brother.
Well, thank you very much, and right back at you. And thank you very much for spending some time with me to come on the podcast and talk about finding joy during the play.
Well, let's keep working on it together.
Absolutely. And that's it for this episode of The Evolved Caveman. If you like this episode, feel free to rate, review, and share with your friends and loved ones. If you didn't like it, you don't have to do a damn thing. Thank you very much. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.